Okay, so one of the other important aspects of 7-string playing is some basic guidelines on how to set your tone, particularly overdrive tone in this case, if you're recording or playing in a band. Now, it's not for me to say exactly how you should set your tone, but these basics should hopefully help you get a tighter, more cutting sound whilst not sacrificing sustain and playability. So let's start from the pedal end of my rig. This is a very basic rig. It doesn't matter really what you have. I'm using a fairly high gain setup in terms of style of amp. It's a high gain amp. I don't use lots of gain, but it's known as a high gain amp. Now on the floor here I have 3 pedals. This is my rig. On the far left here I've got a noise gate. In the middle I've got a tube screamer style overdrive, and I've just got a tuner at the end there. Now first of all, the noise gate stops some of the residual kind of hum that you'll get through a high gain amp at a loud volume. I have it set very low. It will cut out notes as soon as I stop them on the fingerboard. So instant. If I turn it off, it won't be that much noticeable at this level, but you can still hear the kind of finger noise when I stop. So the noise gate is just setting a threshold for the minimal sound level. In front of that I've got a tube screamer type pedal, and it's just an overdrive. Now I don't actually use the drive control on these style pedals. Most of these style pedals have a volume, a tone and a drive. Now I have the volume all the way up. I have my tone all the way up in my circumstance, and I have the drive turned all the way off. Now what this does is it pushes the amp. It doesn't overdrive the amp, it just kind of pushes it a little bit more and tightens and compresses that sound slightly for the low end. So with it off, my lower strings still sounds great, but I think it could do with tightening up and a bit more focusing. So by setting your overdrive pedal similar to this, hear the difference. That's it with it off. It offers a kind of mid boost, middle range equalization boost. Turn it off again. So it's not necessarily for extra gain, it's just tightening up that amp sound. So let's move to the amp section of the how I set my tone. Now obviously all different types of amp have a multitude of controls, but the controls I'm interested in showing you, which are universal to all amps, are the rhythm, gain, bass, middle and treble basically. Okay, so I like to have my gain set fairly low. Now the reason why is I can attack the string more and I can have a bit more dynamic control. I can sort of, if I pick lightly and start to pick harder, you can get more dynamic range out of the string. So having less gain certainly accents that ability to be able to get more dynamic in your playing. And it also actually tightens up the sound as well. It makes it easier to play these stop-start rhythms. And if you're playing with another guitarist, you don't want tons of gain. It gets messy, it gets feedback and noise, you can lose note definition. So having the gain a bit less kind of gives you a bit more control. So I have mine set here, it says 4 on my particular amp, but I'll often have it between 4 and 6, depending on what guitar pickup I've got in. If it's a high output pickup, I'd have it back a bit. If it's low output, opposite way. It's up to you really, but it's just as a guideline. So the next part is our equalization controls. Now this is how I've got mine set today for the particular speaker cabinet we're going through. We're going through a kind of vintage style kind of cab, which sounds really kind of punchy in the low end and doesn't have too much of a harsh highness, which is kind of nice actually. I have my bass about midway. If anything, maybe back it off slightly, because that's the range where your bassist is meant to be playing. Often a mistake I see with extended range guitarists when they're starting out 7 or 8 string, in fact, is that they put loads of bass in their tone. Let me just show you how that might sound. So here's my tone without. And it might make things sound a bit more woofier and a bit more punchy by yourself, but when you're playing with a band, all of that frequency and power gets lost behind the bassist and the drummer. So it's very good to have this backed around midday-ish, depending, okay? And the next control is the most important control on the amp. It's the middle control. And this is the range, the frequency range where the guitar sits. It needs the middle range. I've seen a lot of bands doing, especially people starting to play live, seem to always come out to play live with their sort of bedroom tone, where they've scooped all the mids back like this. And as you can hear, it sounds fine, but I think you really give the guitar more body and a bit more aggressive edge by pushing that mid. Let me push it all the way extreme just so you can really hear it. So you can really see as soon as I turned this around the effect that had. I have it sort of just past midday. And that middle range will give you enough cut in a live situation to fit and blend with the band, and it will sound much larger and more punchy. The treble, that's very much a personal preference thing. I like to have a bit of bite in my tone. If I roll that all the way back, you get a very dark tone. And on a 7-string guitar, you really want to be able to hear the string. One of the things I love about the sound of 7-string guitar is the kind of bitiness. So having that treble still within that frequency range really gives it that bite. So that's something to be aware of. Now, one more control on the amp which I'd like to talk about. On my Laney here it says tone, but on most amps it would probably say presence. And that is the overall treble response of your amplifier, how shrill it can sound or how dark it can sound. Now, I like to have mine sort of backed off a bit, so I've got my treble here giving me the sparkle. But when I turn the presence up a bit, all the way up, you can really hear that difference. I like to have it around backed off a little bit just so I get a bit more sort of warmth in the tone. But like I say with all these things, it's completely personal preference. These are just guidelines of things to be aware of when setting up your tone for your 7-string guitar. Now, the last thing I'd like to talk about is actually on the guitar itself, tone-wise. Now, a lot of people I've seen on the internet asking questions, and you see a lot of people with 7, 8 and 9-string and even 6-string guitars, they're using either a hairband or some kind of muting device, and one of the most common questions I see is, what is that for? And it's not doing any muting, it's behind the nut here. What it's doing, if I just take this off a second, I don't know if the mics are going to pick this up, but if I do this, you can really hear that sort of ringing out. And if I turn my volume up a little bit on my guitar, you have that, and every time you play a note, we get a slight ringing. If I turn my noise gate off, it's even more noticeable. It's very subtle, but it's the sort of thing that loud volumes can induce feedback. It can also make recordings sound a little bit untidy. So it's by no means a cheating thing or anything like that, because there's no such thing as cheating in music, by the way. But if you're putting a mute on there or any kind of foam or whatever you can find, it will just subdue that ringing out and make things sound a lot more tidier in general. So there we are, that's my guide to tone. Hopefully you can apply these same sort of settings to whatever amp you're using, whether it be valve or digital. It's completely personal preference there, but these are just guidelines in order to help you sit better in a mix, whether it be recording or in a band. Okay, let's see you in the next section for some playing examples.